Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. I've recorded the following segment as part of the other video, but it just didn't fit together narratively. So I'm releasing it now as a standalone, but the information is still pretty accurate. Let's follow up on the Kursk situation. As we talked about in the last video, Ukrainians have been pulling out from the Kursk region, and I said that we might see them withdrawing completely in a matter of days. Now we see that the situation is indeed that how it looks like, and Ukrainians are slowly but surely leaving. I know that there are videos that are being published about some Ukrainians being caught out, some Ukrainians being captured and then killed. And unfortunately, I cannot show you that because YouTube doesn't want us to see the truth of war. But the truth of the matter is that if you look at the big picture, and this channel specifically, we always try to look at the big picture, then majority of the analysts are stating that the pulling out of the Ukrainian forces have been overall orderly without significant losses. There's always losses. This is war, but we do not see supposedly the collapse on the front line. And here is a check for you to see whether it is organized withdrawal or it is like the Russian propagandists are claiming that Ukrainians are just running and throwing away their weapons and the whole front is collapsing. So in the coming days, supposedly, Ukrainians will completely leave the Kursk area. And this is where the check comes in. Because if it is the collapse, it shouldn't really matter for Russians where they end up with following the Ukrainians that are quote unquote running away. So we would see that Russians would just easily continue penetrating into the Sumy region. And in the coming days and week, we will see Russia taking significant part of the Sumy region, for example. Then we would indeed see that there was supposedly panic in the Ukrainian armed forces. However, I do not believe so. And specifically, let's talk about what Kursk region was, what Kursk region is, and what it could have been. Firstly, let's remember why specifically Ukraine went into Kursk. If you remember, at that moment, Russia has been attacking Ukraine on multiple fronts, specifically in the east, and they had significant advantage in their resources. Ukrainians have used some of the efficient brigades to penetrate the weak point that Russia left on their Kursk region, where they just opened up and they took a pocket of the territory. And they occupied that territory. It's important to say, Kursk region is not the territory of Ukraine. Ukraine is not fighting this war to capture Russian territory. So after that, everyone says, well, it's a failure. Ukrainian operation was a failure because they didn't reach the Kursk city. They didn't reach the nuclear power plant. But a lot of the people, a lot of the analysts said, no, Ukraine was not really planning to do so. Ukraine just wanted to start attracting attention of the Russian because Russians were too greedy. What happened essentially is Russia was able to advance and hyper-concentrate their forces around the eastern part of the front, whereas Ukrainians, they had to have forces defending along the whole border line with Russia. So Ukrainians essentially, by penetrating that's inside of the Russian region of the Kursk, they forced some forces to move from the east front line, but also a lot of the new forces that got freshly trained from Russia, they were sent from Kursk. And moreover, there is an additional push of the North Korean troops that came in also to fight in the Kursk region. At some point, the number of forces that Russia had in Kursk region has become pretty obscene for Ukrainians. They had 3-4 to 1 advantage. And the only reason they were not able to advance was because Russian command and control was so poor that despite the resource advantage, they were still struggling to conduct all competent attacks. And they did 3 attacks beforehand. And then now we saw the 4th attack, which was this time prepared a lot more carefully. We saw about the operation with the pipe that supposedly went into the Suja. That attack was thwarted. We had multiple videos proving that that attack into the pipe was not competent. But more importantly, what was competent, what did create a lot of troubles for Ukrainians, is right before them. And I think the best way to show it, if I kind of move a little bit into the past, is this thrust of Russians towards Novinke right over here and towards Plekhovo right over here. This specifically overlapped with the ban of supply of intelligence from the US to Ukraine, and supposedly this is what caused that penetration to occur. And again, there's more Russians in this area than Ukrainians. Please remember that. So what happened after that is that Ukrainians had this supply line that they used to supply the Kursk region salient. And all of the people, all of the analysts, everyone that was in a Kursk region will tell you that it was never a walk in a park. It was always super difficult to be in a Kursk region. And therefore, once Russians got into the range, they started using a lot of drones, a lot of the optical wire-guided drones that they started basically pummeling any kind of supplies that Ukraine tried to get into the Kursk region. And this basically created a question for Ukrainians. Do we stay or do we go? Remember, the Kursk is not territory of Ukraine. There are benefits to holding Kursk, like negotiation advantage and so on, but it's not, is it worth like dying for, like as a last stand? And that is the question that I want to ask you. Like, if this would be you, would you really stand there like this is your last stand, where a lot of your logistics are just being pummeled and potentially you don't have free resources to overtake the Russian advances just because they have a mass of people? Is it something you want to fight for? And I believe this is where the decision was made that it's like, no, it's not worth it. Just preserve our forces, withdraw, and let's fight the Russians at the more efficient positions. We will see whether this was a withdrawal or collapse in coming days. We talked about the test beforehand. But most importantly, that we need to understand is that Kursk operation was a major success. Incredible success, because all of the negatives that are being painted about Ukraine now leaving Kursk, it's been like done and over with. Russia has sustained insane casualties in this area, absolutely stupendously insane. Ukrainians did an amazing job stopping any kind of Russian attacks. They attacked Russia where it was painful for them, and more importantly, in a strategic sense, now Russia is basically needs to monitor the border. Now Russia cannot just pull their forces from these territories. Now it's going to be always looking back into Ukrainian potentially attacking into the other area. Now, obviously, the obvious question stands is what to do with this about 50,000+ troops that Russia amassed in this region to fight the Ukrainian salient and Kursk. That is a good question. Hopefully, the defenses of Sumy are prepared and they will be fighting against Russians, and I believe the Ukrainian armed forces. But generally speaking, it doesn't really matter for Ukrainians where to fight the Russians right now, especially because right now Ukrainians were able to stabilize the situation on their eastern front. Remember why the Kursk started initially? And now we are also getting daily reports of Ukrainians actually counterattacking and pushing Russians back. So now potentially Russia will be considering, well, maybe we need to put more troops back into the east, yet we cannot kind of take all of the troops and completely leave the Kursk area vulnerable again. I still think it was a major victory for Ukraine. They attacked where no one was expecting. They did a great operation. Russia sustained significant losses, and when the situation became too costly to maintain, Ukrainian command just said pull out. Now, obviously, there will be news about how bad it was, about how many people lost their lives. This is war, and the stories of war are never good, especially if we're talking about withdrawal from somewhere and so on. It's always going to be painful, and it's always going to be problematic. Will be potentially some more data where certain commanders wasn't acting to their best capabilities. But generally speaking, what I want this community and everyone else to understand that Kursk offensive was success already after the first week. And when the Russians just started pouring in troops and losing them at stupendous numbers, it just became more and more and more beneficial. It would be even more beneficial if Ukraine could hold it for more, but they couldn't. So we are where we are now. Don't worry about it. The war goes on. Ukraine is not fighting this war to keep any territory for Russia. Ukraine is fighting this war to get the Russians out of their land. And if you support Ukraine, then subscribe to this channel. We have new fundraisers coming out and some really big announcements that are going to be coming out that will benefit the Ukrainian armed forces. So trust in Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.
I see